Hello and welcome. This is Hands on Health, the podcast all about living your healthiest life on the coast. I'm Austin Miller.
And I'm Alyssa Evans. Today we're joined by Reverend Lori Blake, Columbia Memorial Hospital's chaplain. Lori, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
To start us off, Lori, would you mind talking about what inspired you to work as a chaplain?
What inspired me is part of being trained as a pastor. You have to have one unit of what they call clinical pastoral experience and to serve as a chaplain somewhere. And at the time I was living in Minnesota and I served at a VA medical center. And, I kind of thought, what am I going to learn from all these old men? But I had a great learning experience there. So that's one requirement. To go further into chaplaincy, and to be a chaplain, you need a total of 4 of those pastoral experiences, and they call them CPE units. And so as I've served as a pastor, my first call was in Minnesota for 8 years, and then I felt called to do something different and moved out to Oregon and served a church in Florence, Oregon for 5 years. And at that time, I decided to complete those other 3 units, and I would commute to Riverbend in Eugene, which is the Trauma 2 hospital, and continued to learn about chaplaincy. And I have always enjoyed meeting with people and relationship building in my ministry, and chaplaincy is a big chunk of it. Involves that, and mainly walking alongside a person wherever they're at, whatever denomination or faith, or people that say they have no faith or spirituality, wherever they're at, you are there to join them where they're at. And so that actually attracted me into chaplaincy. I was working at 2 churches in Tillamook, an Episcopal church and a Lutheran church part-time, a total of 20 hours when I saw this opening for a full-time chaplaincy position at Columbia Memorial. And so that's what brought me here.
How long have you been with the hospital now, Lori?
I started at the time of COVID, so it's coming on my third anniversary of being here. So what I find interesting in all my times of chaplaincy, I've never worn a mask. And now at Columbia Memorial, I've never not worn a mask in the hospital. So I'm so used to it now, but that's just, I think, the nature of healthcare at this time, whether we're dealing with a pandemic or not. I think that's just where we're at.
Do you mind explaining what you do during like a typical day at work?
Yes, a typical day at work is I check to see what the census is at the hospital, see how many people are in CCU, how many are in med-surg. I even take a look at who's in emergency just to get an idea. And then I also serve hospice patients, so I take a look at what's going on with the different patients. And I have actually with me, you can't see it, but it's a backpack that I have learned to have with me at all times. And in that backpack, I have a Bible, I have a devotional book, I have communion. So if people are interested in receiving communion, I have water from the River Jordan, so in case anyone is wanting to be blessed by that. I also carry anointing oil that came from the Holy Land. I've had it for about 6 years, and it's maybe a third of the bottle has been used, but I've used it a lot. And then I do travel with a little canister that holds bookmarks that are artistic paintings from artist in Arch Cape, and they are reprints, but with every visit that I make, I offer a bookmark and something, and sometimes it does spar on conversation. And it's just, I think everybody enjoys getting a little something. And so so my week is, so that's kind of how I start my day. I'm also open to calls wherever they come, whether it's hospice or the hospital or the cancer center, because I go to the cancer center just any time throughout the day just to check in on patients that are either waiting for radiation or that are in infusion, receiving chemotherapy, and check in with them to offer support.
Wow, that sounds like a lot. That must keep you pretty busy.
Well, it sounds It can be busy. I think what I usually describe my role, and I look at all our positions as callings, and that's in ministry. You're called to a church, and in this case, I'm called to a hospital serving patients and employees and even people I meet in the parking lot. If I start a conversation with someone, I'm there as a listening ear. So my job or my calling can seem busy, and I never know what a day will entail. And that's positive. That's exciting. But it's also daunting because you never know what a day is going to entail. Just last Saturday, I was presiding at a funeral, and on the way to the burial, I had an emergency call from the hospital. So after the burial, went over to the hospital. So you sometimes get pulled from different activities or different things that you're doing. But yeah.
So you kind of touched on this already, but what are some of the different ways that you interact with patients?
I do two different things. Sometimes I'll introduce myself as the chaplain, but sometimes I also will say I'm part of the spiritual care support team. I have found that is less threatening. If I say chaplain, people right away think either one, they're doing really poorly and the chaplain's here, kind of end of life type thing. But I typically introduce myself and usually start with the question, just how is your day going? How are things going? And people will usually definitely offer up how their day is going. And I mainly listen. And I've had people that are talking, that say, I'm not religious. I don't want to talk faith or, that kind of thing. And that's fine. Why don't let's talk about football. Let's talk about, it's kind of, you're there as a chaplain to kind of support whatever they're wanting to talk about. I've had folks that are talking about just general things, the weather, and then they all of a sudden share experiences they've had with the church, maybe in their past that were not so good, or they may share of other experiences they've had and know that I'm a confidential ear, and so I provide support that way. And I don't have to pray with everybody. I've learned to just say, I can pray if you like, because at other times I'd say I can say a prayer or would you like a prayer? And a patient would say, well, if you have to. And it's like, well, no, I don't have to. I mean, it's what they want, again, just the whole plain tree person-centered care to be thinking about.
You've touched on this a little bit. Do you mind explaining how you work with different faiths, whether that is maybe different patients who have different faiths or other churches or other organizations?
Mm-hmm. How I work with different faiths, I usually don't ask a person. I'll maybe ask if they have spiritual support, and they may offer up that, yes, I belong to St. Mary's Star of the Sea Catholic Church or things like that. And then I'm able to say, oh, I know Father Aruku, and have a conversation. So I think with different faiths, I work with kind of not only where they're at, but what their needs are, because depending on different denominations or different faiths, they may have certain things that they require. And quite honestly, I haven't had a total variety of things here, but I have recently been asked what resources we offer for Indigenous patients. And I'm in the search right now of a spiritual leader that's in the Indigenous community. So we can also offer that and what their resources that they may have. I do have a group that I started probably about 2 years ago that's community spiritual leaders from the area. And I have about 9 members in that, and they come from different denominations. And so that is meant to be a group to support the spiritual leaders so they can support one another. But it's also an opportunity for them to get to know each other and for me to get to know them. So if for instance, we had a patient that was in the emergency room that was Episcopalian and really wanted an Episcopalian priest. And I had just met Pastor Karen Sheldon from the Episcopal Church in town and called her, and she came and she was able to just provide them the support that was really important to them. One thing I can't do, I'm ordained in the Lutheran Church, but I cannot perform last rites. That's strictly a Roman Catholic tradition. And that's where I know Father Aruku a lot, because he has been willing to come and be with a person and perform last rites at a drop of a hat. He's available.
Have there been any standout experiences as a chaplain that you'd like to share?
One standout experience that recently happened that was the first thing that popped in my mind is I was meeting in a lobby area that's by MedSurg, close to one of the gardens. And I was meeting with a family that their mother was at end of life, and meeting with about 5 family members, just talking and offering support and having a conversation with them. And then usually I'll ask a gathered family, is there anything else that I can do right now? Can I check back with you, or just to make sure that they have all their bases covered? And I got up to leave, and there was a woman that was sitting in the corner reading her book, and she came up and stopped me. And she goes, I just have to say, she goes, I don't mean to, but I was listening and overhearing. And I just want to compliment on how gentle and how you worked with this family. And I was like, can I give you a hug? Because, a lot what I do as a chaplain, it's not the type of calling that you do get thanks and things like that, but things like that happen are just so organic. And it was just really a boost for my day, and kind of a reminder of why I do what I do.
I think that's great. Well, Lori, those are the main questions we had for you. Is there anything else that you would like people to know, whether it's about your job or maybe the chaplain services at CMH?
I think as far as chaplaincy, and even as a pastor, I think sometimes people aren't aware of the schooling and some of the training you go through. And I felt called into ministry later in life. And I'll share just a little piece of my call story. We had moved from one community to another, and I had been a stay-at-home mom. And I was also in the midst of training for a marathon with a friend of mine and discerning what I was going to do next. And I wasn't sure what it was, but at the time I was reaching out, and one of the fields I reached out to was a fireman. So I called the fire chief and talked, and he, in a nice way, he was saying I was 38 at the time, but was kind of saying you're a little old for that. But then I went further as far as talking to my pastor and long and short of it is I attended seminary, and one of my professors basically did say you're putting out fires as a pastor. So he thought that was kind of funny. But I think as a return to school, so that was a 4-year program that took me 5 years. So it's a master's degree on top of your undergraduate, and then the CPE trainings, each one of them are probably about 9 months, each of those sessions. And so also with that training, I've had experience with serving as a chaplain on call for trauma situations. So you really have just a whole different scope of things. With CMH as a rural hospital, there are things maybe I've been trained for that I might not be using all the time, but I just feel really well-rounded as a chaplain to fit the needs of people. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much in a nutshell.
I think that's great. And I know you make a really big impact on both staff that work here and patients too. So I think it's really great to hear more about your job.
Yeah, I actually thought of one thing when you said staff. I've started, I'd like to think of a real fun name, but it's basically CMH Caregivers Faith Group. So it sounds kind of whatever, but we meet once a month in conference room A and have conversation and usually have some topic that we're talking about. And then the prayer team that also serves with praying the prayers, that all the cards that are handed in, that group also has started to meet monthly. So again, offering support for staff. So that's one other thing I thought of. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lori, for coming in and sharing a little bit about what you do and some of the work that I'm sure many people aren't as aware of that happens behind the scenes in the hospital. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Glad to be here.
Well, and thank you too, listener, for joining us today. This has been an episode of Hands on Health, brought to you by Columbia Memorial Hospital in Astoria, Oregon. CMH is an independent, not-for-profit health system that provides comprehensive, person-centered care in Northwest Oregon.
Find us wherever you listen to podcasts, online at columbiamemorial.org, and on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us next time for another episode of Hands on Health.